First to the case of Adam Howe, who died by suicide in a Bristol County Jail over the weekend. He'd been arrested on Friday in Truro after police said he killed his mother in the house where they both lived and then set her body on fire in the front lawn. After he was taken to a nearby hospital for a physical issue, the Cape and Islands DA wanted Howe, who has a history of mental illness, to be committed to another facility, Bridgewater State Hospital, for a mental health evaluation. But according to the DA, a hospital administrator declined to admit Howe, who was instead taken to Ash Street Jail in New Bedford. There he was put on security watch and checked on every 15 minutes by a corrections officer, but obviously that was not enough. Cases like this are all too common in Bristol County, which accounted for 13% of all inmates in county correction facilities, but more than a quarter of all suicides from 2006 to 2016, according to a report from the Center for Investigative Reporting here at GBH News. The Boston Globe editorial board called the DOC's decision to send Howe to Ash Street Jail tragic and urged an investigation of his case and more scrutiny of the county's track record overall. I'm joined now by the paper's assistant editorial editor, Pulitzer-nominated opinion writer Rachelle Cohen, who's also on the board of the Mass Association for Mental Health, and by Elizabeth Matos, the executive director of Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts. Thank you both for being here. Shelley, I want to start with you. There are a number of actors in this story. We sketched it out in the intro, but didn't get into how complicated it is. There's the judge, Bridgewater State Hospital, the state police, who said they tried to put Adam Howe in one prison, one jail, but couldn't, so they put him in another. And there are a number of places where things seem to go really badly wrong. I know that a full investigation has not yet occurred, but what's your sense of whether a particular entity or entities deserve the majority of the blame?
Well, let's throw into that mad mixture. All of this is happening at about 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
That's when this tragic sequence of events begins. Should Adam Howe have ended up in the custody of Bristol County? No. They don't have a good track record. And he was in the throes of a mental health crisis. Mm-hmm. He belonged in a secure mental health facility. My issue, and as the editorial raised, the real issue was at Bridgewater, which is now run, its clinical staff is a private, nonprofit contractor to the state. So someone at Bridgewater in the middle of the night looks at the judge's orders, said, this doesn't come under the right rubric. We can't take him under this. Sorry, end of story. According to O'Keefe, and I did speak to him.
The Cape and Islands DA, for people who might not be familiar.
Yes,
yeah.
Sorry, Michael has been very forthcoming on this. Said, we'll get the judge on the phone. We'll get the doctor on the phone. That's where I think things went horribly wrong.
Elizabeth, would you agree with Shelley's assessment, or do you have a different take on what maybe the root problem seems to have been here?
I don't disagree at all. However, of course, they should have gotten the 18A from the beginning, right? That was possible. He could have been committed under 18A and not had the order for the Section 12 to begin with. But also, I would say, Bridgewater certainly mentioned that they didn't have authority to accept him under Section 12, but could accept him under a Section 18A. And at that point, either Bridgewater or the DA could have called the judge back and said, we're here, this is the situation, we need an 18A, and it could have been rectified at that moment. I was not familiar with the different sections of law used to commit people, and I spent some time before our conversation just reading up on them. I am not a lawyer, but I was struck by the fact that it did seem that Section 12 was the wrong mechanism to have used. But as both of you have pointed out, that does not mean that the institution could not have decided to work with people to prevent a really terrible situation from unfolding. Shelley, the Globe... That's just it.
Go ahead. There could have been a negotiation. There is, and not to get too jargony here.
Oh, please.
There is Section 15. Under Section 15, It says the court may commit. Now, is the court, is that a judge in the middle of the night negotiating over the phone, an emergency judge on call, negotiating with a superintendent on call at Bridgewater? Does that constitute a Section 15 under the best of circumstances? And that's also, I'm not a lawyer either, but that's the question that kind of looms large.
You quoted O'Keefe in the editorial saying sometimes the law is an ass. And it seems to me that when you're dealing with a situation as intensely horrific as this one, there should be institutional flexibility when it comes to trying to accommodate a number of people.
You would
so
think.
that more bad things don't occur. Shelley, the Globe editorial suggested the fact that Bridgewater State is run by the Department of Corrections as opposed to the Department of Mental Health is a bigger overarching issue that really needs to be addressed. Why is that the setup? And I probably shouldn't admit this on camera. I actually didn't even realize that that was the case until I read the editorial. Why is it arranged that way?
Well, it's Bridgewater has, since it was founded, and it has a very sad history, has always been a Department of Corrections facilities for dealing with seriously mental ill prisoners. There is no comparable facility outside of DOC that can deal with that population. Prisoner advocates have long advocated for the Department of Mental Health to take over the facility. It's kind of a hybrid now, and it's clearly not working. I mean, the Disability Law Center has been at Bridgewater, monitoring Bridgewater under both a court settlement and under instructions from the legislature to sort of inspect periodically services rendered at Bridgewater. And they have been very unhappy both with the physical plant and with the level of care delivered. So it's been their suggestion for the past several years, at least, that it be turned over to the Department of Mental Health. And this is Shelley Cohen speaking for Shelley Cohen, not for the Boston Globe. I have not been convinced until this case came along. And I'm now in the persuadable category on that issue.
Elizabeth, is there any momentum among lawmakers who could actually force a change like that to make the shift that Shelley was just discussing? Has anyone filed legislation that would do it, or is anyone even talking about filing a bill?
People have been talking about it for decades, actually. There's been legislation filed time and again to make Bridgewater State Hospital a DMH facility. And I would say, although some changes were made years ago so that the care providers have more autonomy in situations of mental health crisis and mental health care generally, I would say it's still not operating independently at all in that way, and it still operates very much like a prison. I think there's a little more momentum recently because of some of the reporting. The DLC, again, did a report somewhat recently highlighting some of the issues that have been endemic to Bridgewater State Hospital for a very long time. We've been involved in litigation around excessive use of restraints and other kinds of segregation and solitary confinement practices there that are incredibly troubling. And also, it's important to point out that we are one of the only states that has a hospital like this run by a prison. And what you get is a prison, not a hospital, because you've undeniably a lot of interference with how things are run. And so it doesn't end up being run like a hospital and like it should. And also, I wanted to point out, as we mentioned, the confusion between Section 12 and Section 18. I think that highlights the problem that we're seeing here, which is that someone is in mental health crisis and it shouldn't be so complicated to get someone help. And it made sense to everyone that he should have been at Bridgewater State Hospital. But because the system is cumbersome, people couldn't quite figure out how to get him there. And the other thing that's really important to mention here is that Bristol could have sectioned him as well. They could have sent him under an 18A to Bridgewater as soon as he got there. They had the power to do so. They should have done so, given all of the facts that were very clear, including his well-documented suicidal ideation that was pronounced during the scene of events. So unfortunately, that didn't happen. So there's blame to share, but I just wanted to make sure we weren't leaving that piece out.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. And it's worth noting that, as many viewers will know, Thomas Hodgson, the sheriff in Bristol County, who's been a controversial figure for many years now, is currently seeking re-election, has a tough race against a Democrat, Paul Howe. Thomas Hodgson has been backed by Governor Baker, who seems to be a fan of the work he's done there. Elizabeth, I want to ask you just briefly about another debate that's unfolding involving the way the state handles mental health in corrections settings. Tell me if I've got this right. There is a new law that was aimed at making it easier for an inmate who felt like they needed mental health treatment to get it, to request a transfer to a psychiatric facility. And Governor Baker, in a supplemental budget, has proposed a modification that would actually take away some agency from prisoners in those situations. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, it's a very good summary. He signed the healthcare omnibus bill, mental health omnibus bill, into law literally just weeks before the supplemental budget came out, where he was then undermining the mental health watch provisions in that law. What it allows for, and the problem, just to lay this out, is the Department of Justice under Trump in 2020 came out with a very scathing report about the state of mental health watch in Massachusetts specifically, because there's a very high correlation between people who are in mental health watch, suicidal ideation, and after mental health watch. So we hear time and again from our clients, if you didn't want to kill yourself before mental health watch, you'll want to kill yourself once you're in there or once you get out. And in fact, that's why there was such a high correlation of suicides happening for folks who are experiencing mental health watch. And that's because it is not used as a therapeutic setting. And as the DOJ stated, it is used as punishment. And so it's not surprising that Adam Howe was placed in a mental health watch cell, gets no therapeutic attention, right? He's in a high state of crisis. He might have been detoxing. We don't know all the details yet. He's put on a 15-minute watch, which is contrary to regular practice. Under those circumstances, there's no reason he shouldn't have been on an eyeball watch.
With constant attention.
Constant attention, right, which is a constant watch. And so that law that you mentioned is really about, for people who are in prolonged mental health watch, which is not meant to be a long-term setting. We have clients who've been in mental health watch, suicide smock, no utensils, you're eating with your hands for months. Wow. It's not intended to be that kind of setting. And so the purpose of that law is to allow people who are in those conditions to petition to be in a psychiatric facility where they can actually get some therapeutic treatment.
I want to, okay, sorry to stop on you. Go ahead, Shelley. You get the last word here.
There is a school of thought that mental health watch in that context is pretty much solitary confinement by another name. Yes. That's how we would know it. And GOC doesn't have a really happy record, even under those circumstances. Remember, they lost probably their most famous prisoner, Aaron Hernandez.
In Bristol County Jail, right?
He was already at Susan Baranowski.
Oh, forgive me. Thank you.
Yeah, the most secure facility there is in this state under a mental health watch. And I do believe the guard was fired, reprimanded, or whatever. I think there was a case of a sleeping guard in that instance. But getting back to the Justice Department report, which is horrifying. It is now 2 years. It will be next month. It will be the 2-year anniversary of that report. It is still, a settlement is still being negotiated. So we had Rachel, we as in the editorial board had Rachel Rollins in just a week or so ago to ask if what the deal is. And her take on it is, yes, we'll get back to you on that. We're still negotiating.
As you describe that, I just find myself thinking, here's another area where in Massachusetts, where we like to think of ourselves as very progressive and enlightened, there's a lot of work still to be done. Shelley Cohen, Elizabeth Matos, thank you both for talking through this very unpleasant topic.
Thank you so much for having us and for focusing on this.
Thanks, Adam.